All right, I'd like to welcome everyone here today. We're excited you've come and joined us for one of our online programs on the American Rose Society. Today, I would like to introduce Ray Shipley. He's been a member of the American Rose Society since 1996. He has been a Consulting Rosarian since 2005 and a Master Rosarian since 2015. He served as a Colonial District CR Chair for 8 years, and he is currently the Colonial District Director. He definitely loves roses. His wife and himself grow about 235 roses. I hope you enjoy this program about winterization of roses in Northern States. Ray Shipley.
Thank you, John. Just as a further introduction, just so that you know what area of the country I'm from, I live in the mountains of Western Maryland, out where it almost gets pinched in half between West Virginia and Pennsylvania. And I'm in an area that the winter hardiness zones kind of range between a 5B and a 6A, depending on one year to the next. And I'm kind of out here all by myself in Colonial District. I've had a lot of problems with loss of roses and the canes being frozen out over the winter time. And I never did get a lot of help from some of my compatriots in Colonial District, simply because they don't live in an area and live under the conditions of grow roses under the conditions that I do. So basically the reason I have this program is I needed to find out more information about proper winterization from roses and protect my roses better and keep from losing the amount. I had been losing anywhere from 4 to 6 every winter, and would have dieback down to the ground level in about 75% of my roses each spring. And so kind of needed to make some corrections on that. So one of the main things that I did in preparation for this program was consulting with Rosarians up in the northern states. And I just want to give a little recognition here to some of the folks that helped me personally on this with what and as with the program. From Wisconsin, Diane Summers, ARS Vice President. Larry Hebish, President of Milwaukee Rose Society. And then from Minnesota, Lois Ann Helgeson, ARS North Central Director. Deborah Kaiser, she's an ARS Master Rosarian and a Rose Specialist for the city of St. Cloud, Minnesota. And Andrew Galboyd, who is the Horticulture Director for Lindale Park Rose Garden in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So they helped me a lot with pictures and information that I utilized with this program. So we'll move on to the next slide here. The Webster's Dictionary, of course, says making ready for winter and making it kind of proof against winter weather. So using that definition, winterization of roses kind of applies to anybody growing roses in the United States, with the only exception being for the folks from the deep south who do not have a dormant season. Winterization is not a big deal for them if they don't have a dormant season. What is the most important consideration with winterization? I think the first thing is the hardiness zone for the geographical location of where you grow roses. Where can you get the hardiness zones? There is a website called helpmefind.com, which has an awful lot of information on roses, and they usually list the hardiness zone for each variety of roses that they have in their catalog there. A lot of times you'll find the information on the tag for the roses when you buy it, or from the producers, and of course the internet. There is one, the website I have here listed, the https //plantHardiness.ars.usda.gov. This is a site that you can find out your hardiness zone. All you have to do is enter the zip code where you live, and that's going to give you a fairly good idea of what your zone is, although do not consider that, use a little bit of common sense with your own geographical area. When I put in my zip code, it comes up to Cumberland, Maryland, which is on the eastern side of a mountain and about 300 feet lower than where I live. It comes up on this site as a zone 7A for Cumberland, where in reality, from where I live, it's more like 5B to 6A, depending on how cold the winter gets, and that varies from one year to the next. And so that's a good site to look at if you don't know for sure. And but then think a little bit, that when you use that information. Some of the cautions for using the hardiness zones for newly planted roses, you particularly for newly planted roses for the first year that rose bush is going to the winter, you need to be more careful. Give it some extra protection, whether that is covering it, whether that is extra mulch or compost against the base of the plant. But you need to particularly be more careful with newly planted roses. If a rose is said to be winter hardy in zone 6, on average, you probably, and most of the folks here in Colonial District, they don't do a whole lot of extra precaution for winter. But you always want to be a little bit on the conservative side and assume one zone lower for your area than because you may get the hard winter, and these charts that you're going to see here in a little bit, they are based on average temperatures, and that can vary from one year to another. Like I said, the numbers may or may not be accurate, and again, just be very, very careful with your newly planted roses and give them extra precaution, extra protection. This is the hardiness zone kind of map for the whole United States, and the one thing I would always caution people using is, rather than picking out, trying to pick out your geographical location on the map, oops, I went back here. You should know what the normal temperatures are for your area. Use the temperature ranges that you really know for your area, and use the chart here that's kind of to the right here, and kind of identifying which plant hardiness zone that you are located in. This range here from the lowest one, which is the coldest ones, all the way down to 15, which is down in Puerto Rico. Okay, now I have some state maps here. Again, I'm from Colonial District. That's Maryland, DC, Delaware, Virginia, West Virginia. I live in Cumberland, just west of Cumberland, out in Western Maryland, and at times I will be in zone 5B. Sometimes it is 6A. So I always plan for the worst case scenario. So I want to protect for 5B. The one area up here in the far western Maryland, in Garrett County, that says 5B all the time. Well, that can actually be 5A at times up there, because it's about 900-foot higher elevation than where I live. West Virginia, most of that is in the 6 zones, except for some areas right in the Appalachian range. There's one area there that's a 5A. If any of you are a skier and know the name of Snowshoe, that's where Snowshoe is in eastern West Virginia. It's very high mountain for being that far south. Virginia, most of the folks there are anywhere from 6 to 7s, and you get all the way down to the Tidewater area around Virginia Beach and Norfolk. Those folks don't do any extra precaution as far as covering or adding various items to cover the base of the plant. They really don't need to down there. Now here's Minnesota. Like I said, I did a little with research in Minnesota, and you can see what they have to deal with there, and they have to take a whole lot more aggressive protection, and we'll get into that a little bit later on the different things that is available. The other factors relating to winterization of roses is what type of plant do you have? Do you have an old garden shrub rose? You probably don't need to do anything. Even the folks up in Minnesota, for the most part, don't cover or do anything extra for some of the old garden shrub roses. They are very winter hardy. But if you're planting modern roses, hybrid teas, floribundas, mini floras, and such, you better be careful. You need to protect those plants more. The health of the plant obviously is very important, because if you have a weak plant going into the winter time, it may not make it through the winter then. So and don't be surprised if you lose that plant in the winter time. If you know that thing is kind of on its last days and is not very healthy plant, it's probably going to happen. How and where roses are planted are important. If you are planting roses in close to your house, you can figure on maybe one zone higher on the winter hardiness. And if you have more protection against the wind, I have a lot of winds where my roses are planted. We get wind blowing down from the highland areas of the next county that's about 1,000 feet higher elevation, and also southwestern Pennsylvania. And the fourth thing there, of course, is the preparation of the plants for the winter time. And we'll get into that a little bit further, because that's one area that, whether you need to use extra coverings or protection for the roses, you do need to prepare your plants for winter time. Again, many of the shrubs, old garden roses, do not require that much winter protection. But most of course, your modern hybrid teas, floribundas, minis, mini floras, need some kind of protection in zone 6 or lower numbers. And you might want to consider, which is something I've been doing in the last few years, is buying roses that are known for winter hardiness. I have one garden that I've got about 20 buck roses in it, and they don't need to do as serious of winter protection for them because they are pretty winter hardy. And also, by the way, those buck roses tend to be pretty disease resistant as well. So that's another good advantage with that. Tree roses is an interesting thing with if you're in zone 6 or lower, you need to have some serious protection for the tree roses. Either the Minnesota tipping, which I'll get into that a little bit more detail. You can dig them up and bury them for the winter time. Or one thing that I have done is I had one tree rose that I put it in a pot and brought that into my unheated garage for the winter time. And that works out pretty well. It gives you, you're not going to lose the rose. I had a situation this week where I was at the local Lowe's big box store, and they were selling the tree roses about 35 bucks. And I talked to the director of the garden house area, and she had no idea that if for this area where I live, if you take that tree rose and plant it in the ground and don't do anything like the 3 things that are mentioned here, that rose is going to become an annual. It's going to be lost. People that spent 35 hours for that rose bush is going to expect it to be growing next spring. It's not. And I gave a little bit of education to the garden supervisor, and whether she uses it or not for customers, who knows, but I tried. Particularly the health of the plant, obviously the healthy plants have the best chance of surviving winter. Own root roses are generally more winter resistant than the grafted roses. I'll give you one example on that. For about 8 years or so, I've had a nice hybrid tea rose called St. Patrick, which is a yellow rose. Obviously, with some green tint to it around the edges of it. Some of you may grow this particular plant, but it is a very tender plant. For the first 3 years I had that rose, it became an annual each year. I lost it every year. In those 3 years, I bought grafted roses, and I said, "Now this isn't working out here." So I thought I'm going to give it one more time with the own root roses, and I've had that rose now for 6-7 years with the own root. Sometimes I get dieback all the way to the ground, but it comes back, and I've had the same rose bush, and so that's an example there of how the own root will fare better in the winter than the grafted roses. Some other deficiencies that cause you to may not survive the winter. Plants with premature loss of foliage. You've lost your leaves. You lose your leaves. That weakens your plant. Plants weakened by disease or insects. I'm doing a presentation next month on an insect called the spotted lanternfly, which is very prevalent, particularly in the eastern and mid-Atlantic areas and in Penn Jersey's district. That insect sucks the juices out of the plant, and then it makes it more susceptible to winter kill. And so that's a problem area for those of us in the east, and hopefully it can be controlled before it spreads to other areas. How and where the roses are planted is very important. The roses planted next to the house can usually be considered one zone higher. The planting technique of grafted roses, it is compared to the own root roses compared to grafted, is the graft itself, the bud union. In my opinion, if you're zone 6 or lower, that bud union should not be planted above ground level. And if you're zone 5 or lower, that bud union should be about 2 inches or more below ground to protect that bud union. And I'll give an example of with 2 different locations of how this can work. Down in Baltimore, there is a museum called the Flag House that 3 of my Rosarian friends take care of about 100 roses there. And the Flag House is a museum. It was formerly the home of Mary Pickersgill, who made the flag that flew over Fort McHenry during the War of 1812. And by the way, there is a nice mini flora called Mary Pickersgill. It's kind of a blend between yellow and orange. Now, if you go, that flag house is protected by the building from the north, the east, and the west. And in the Baltimore and Maryland, your prevailing winds are going to be from the north and west. So that they're protected there. So they really don't have to do anything extraordinary to protect those roses. However, if you go about 2 miles to the east to the site of Fort McHenry, and if you planted roses in the open ground outside of the fort walls, which by the way there is no roses there, but if you did, they're going to be susceptible to the wind because they're out in an open area, and you would have to give them some protection that you don't have to do back at the Flag House. But so it does depend a lot on exactly where your roses are planted and how and what you do for protecting the rose for winter. The preparation of roses for winter, and this is very appropriate for even those of you from down south that don't have to cover or put mulch or compost or whatever over the base of your roses, but there is the preparation of the roses, and that basically means what I've got here is the fertilizing. You should stop 6 weeks to 2 months prior to the average first frost. Slow release fertilizers should not be used later on in the summertime. Deadheading should stop about the same time that you stop fertilizing. In my area, that's Labor Day. That's my trigger to stop the deadheading and then to no more fertilizing. If you spray, and some of you spray, some of you don't. I'm not making any judgment on that, but if you do, keep doing it until the first frost. which has already hit here in my area. We've had 3 nights of frost. Keep watering it as necessary if Mother Nature doesn't supply enough water for your plants. And the fall pruning shouldn't be done in the fall only after the plant shuts down and it's basically in a dormant state. And for our area, that means at least 2 nights of temperatures in the mid-20s. Not just a frost, but a hard freeze. If you have a couple of days of hard freeze, that plant will shut down and you can safely do your fall pruning, and don't do it earlier because that will stimulate the plant to grow more, and you don't want to do that going into winter time. My usual reason for pruning in the fall is, and I have some plants out in my garden that are, I'm 6'2", and there's some of them that are several inches taller than me. And I get a lot of wind, and they can tear at the roots if I don't cut them down for wintertime. And then, of course, I do my second pruning in the springtime. And but like I said, do not do the pruning until that plant shuts down. And like I said, for my area, it's 2 nights of mid-20s temperatures. And the type of winter protection, kind of from the least to the most. The most commonly used is some kind of mulch, oak bark, wood chips, pine needles, usually piled up 8 to 10 inches high above the base of the plant. Covering the plant with soil or compost is used and is actually more dense and more effective for winterizing than just the mulch alone. And I want to give a thank you to one of the best consulting Rosarians in the Mid-Atlantic, Nick Weber, who explained to me the importance of using either soil or compost for part of your covering of the base of the plant. And I use a mixture of the compost and mulch, which goes further than just mulch alone. And of course, that compost is more dense than mulch. And I like to use compost more so than just dirt. Dirt will do the same thing as far as protection. It's going to be more dense, but you put the compost on it, you've got all the good nutrients then that's going to go into that plant with the next growing season after you've had that on the base of your plant. And here in Maryland, it's easy to get compost. The state of Maryland is in the business of making compost, and they sell it. It's called leaf grow. That's one of my rose beds. I believe that's my white garden. All of them were some various form of white roses, from hybrid teas down to minis, and that just has the mulch on it, and is covered by about 3 inches of snow. And some of the if you have, like I talked about earlier, a new plant that this is the first winter for the plant, some of the extra protection, or if you know it's a tender rose, putting a cage around that plant and filling up the cage with compost mulch, at least 2 feet deep. And additionally, you can put solid curtains of fabric around the roses to protect them against the wind damage and drying out. And again, I kind of want to pound home this message that newly planted roses require more protection than roses that have been through at least one winter time. And this is what I'm talking about as far as you make your own cage out of various chicken wire, things like that, and then pile it up with compost, mulch, or leaves to protect those plants. This is a picture that was given to me by Andrew Galboy. It was at the home of a previous horticulture supervisor at Lindale Gardens in Minnesota. This gentleman just piles up leaves over the top of his rose beds. I don't know if he uses any mulch underneath of that or compost covering the plants, but for the most part, he's covering it up with at least a foot to foot and a half of leaves, preferably oak leaves. And again, this is Lindale. This is in the Lindale Gardens, and they have you can see there they've got a plastic staked up around the beds, and they're filling it with the leaves for the winter time. And that's one of technique that they do utilize there. This is another one that they don't utilize there. I never saw that, but the rose cones, you got to make sure you have some holes in it to breathe, or else you can cook your roses. But that can be effective. The only difficulty is you've got to store those rascals for next summer, and I personally do not use that. I talked earlier about the Minnesota tipping, and which is not as much commonly utilized nowadays as what it used to be. Just to let you know exactly what it is, it was first introduced about 1954 as a method after watching raspberry growers, and it was demonstrated in 1966 at an ARS convention. It starts with digging a trench about the same height as the bush, and tie the rose canes together, then pull away dirt from the shank between the bud union and the roots. Then take the bush and bend it over and stake it down into the trench that you've dug. And you need to stake it down and then cover it with dirt, compost, leaves, or mulch. The tipping was mostly replaced by the covering roses with most people call them concrete blankets. And the tipping has been recommended in zones 5 to 6 for tree roses planted actually just out in the ground. It's it's something, if you don't do the protection for those tree roses, and then they're going to be annuals. This is St. Cloud, Minnesota Rose Garden in preparation for tipping. You'll notice through the garden there, the canes are all tied up together. The trenches have not been dug yet, I don't think, in here, but they're getting ready for then they'll tip that over and cover them. This was discontinued. I think you all can see the date there. I can't see it on my computer here, but it has been discontinued in St. Cloud for a number of years. And using the what they do now is the concrete blankets. And a lot of the Rosarians in the zones 3 to 5 has switched to using landscape or concrete blankets instead of the Minnesota tipping. The reason why they're called concrete blankets, contractors use those same kind of blankets to cover fresh concrete when they're pouring concrete in cold weather situations, because if you allow the concrete to freeze before it has cured, then it's just going to crack and break up, and they're going to have to start all over again. Because whereas the concrete blankets can keep the concrete from freezing, and and then you end up having good concrete. And concrete blankets can be, they have different R values, or that R value is the insulation value, basically. And they even make some with coils in it to heat them. And but that is one technique that is commonly used up in the northern states. And I tried some of that last winter, and I'll get to that in a little bit later. The one thing that you must do if you're using the concrete blankets, you need to protect them against the critters eating the plants. I mean, critters, everything from voles and moles, chipmunks. You need to use some bait for that, or castor oil is a repellent for voles and moles. They just don't like the smell of it. There's a product I use to kill the voles and moles. It's don't know exactly how do you pronounce it, but it's MOTOMCO, which I get from Gemplers.com. It's like an imitation worm, and it is very effective for killing voles and moles. Another technique is to build a structure to cover with blankets, and I do have pictures of that as well. Insulation boxes is another tactic for protecting roses in very cold weather areas. The one disadvantage of all of these type of things is that you need a storage area for the concrete blankets, the brick and stone that holds them down, and the boxes if you're using insulation boxes. This is the Virginia Clemens garden, rose garden in St. Cloud. They're in preparation. You can see they're starting to put the blankets down. You can see, you look through there, the dark areas right underneath each plant, that's compost. They cut the plants down to in the area of somewhere of around 10 inches to a foot, and like I said, use the compost of covering the plants, and then putting the blankets on them. And the blankets on there, from what Deborah Keyser is the one that sent me the picture of this. She told me that they use the blankets that are almost an R8, which are thicker than heavier than the ones that I utilized in this past winter. This is in Lindale Rose Garden in Minnesota. There you can see some of their gardens, they're just covering with leaves, and some of it they're covering with blankets. And the blankets, I feel, is more effective, and but you got to make sure that you put some bait down for the critters that kind of want to find their way inside of those blankets. And that's what the Clemens Garden in St. Cloud looks like with everything completely done. Looks very neat with what they've done with the with all the blankets and the bricks holding it in place. They got to have some storage area to put all that away come next spring. But from what I have been told, they have taken temperature readings in the middle of winter underneath that blanket, and it's above freezing. So it does work for you're in a real cold weather area. These are structures that in Lois Ann Helgeson's garden that her husband must be a pretty good carpenter, because he made all these structures here and to cover all of her rose beds. And that's what it looks like after everything is all covered up. And she tells me that it does very well. And here's an example of how well it does. These are some new roses that were still in pots that she just laid down underneath the blankets, and you look at those canes and they're nice and green. So obviously that structure in the blankets, it does work. So that is another technique that now some of you folks obviously down further south, now you don't need to do this, but I find it remarkable what the Rosarians up in the northern states have to go through in order to have a nice rose garden. Here is the insulation boxes with the top areas removed of it. And again, that works, but again, you got to have a place to put those boxes when they're not in place. I'm a retired Navy, and I went to a ship reunion in September 2018 up in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, and my wife and I took a drive up to Duluth, and they have a wonderful rose garden up there. It's called Leif Erikson Garden. It's right off the downtown. It's actually, the rose garden is about 15, 20 feet right over top of the interstate highway. That's that much dirt between the garden and down to the tunnel where the interstate goes through. And this area is zone 3, and the day we were there was a gale blowing in off of Lake Superior, and the feel-like temperatures were in the 30s. And when I was there, I saw 150 tree roses, and I was incredulous. It was like, how do they protect a tree rose for this kind of winter up there? And of course, the answer is they dig them up, take them off site into a trench that they prepared, and bury them for the winter time. Obviously with everything tagged so that they know what it is, and to put it back in the same area. And the folks at the Lindale Garden in Minneapolis, they do the same thing. And again, that is a lot of work. And like I said, that's my kudos to them for all the work that they have to go through to have a nice rose garden. And that rose garden is very, very nice in Duluth. So if you ever get up there, please stop by and visit them. The winterizing potted roses, that picture with the Lois's garden there with the potted rose laid on their side and covered with construction blankets. It did a very nice job protecting them. And the other thing is to bring the rose inside an unheated garage that's, that's kind of keeps between 20 and 40 degrees. And the one thing I found that that you kind of should do for them is to spray those plants with a fungicide. I lost a couple of them one winter because I didn't, and a fungus took over and it killed 2 plants. And you need to thoroughly water them when you bring them first in, and then just keep the soil slightly moist over the winter, and if possible, keep them off the floor and away from drafts, and they keep them towards the inside house wall instead of the outside house wall. My last one down here is my sister lives up in the Anchorage area of Alaska, and what most of the people up there do that want roses, they plant them in pots, and then there are greenhouses in the Anchorage area that have a service where they come and pick up the pots, take them and put them in the greenhouse for the winter time. They come back in the spring when it's safe, and that's how a lot of folks up there enjoyed roses up there. And they grow wonderfully during the growing season up there because of the long days that they have up there. And I saw a bunch of them one time at a state fair in up in north of Anchorage. And so that's another hard way of having a rose garden. This is my experiment for the 2019-2020 garden, and you can see there I have in the far background I've got 2 small gardens with it's sediment control for type of things that you see in construction projects. And I filled that with oak leaves, and that did reasonably well. And then the one garden there, and I have 2 gardens that I have the concrete blankets on. And then the closest up here, what I've done with those is to put down compost first, and then hardwood bark mulch afterwards. And I even kind of went a little bit overboard on this garden too, because most of the roses in this particular garden are buck roses, and they probably didn't need them, but I said, well, I'm going to go ahead and give them some good protection. There's the rest of my roses. I put 2 or 3 inches. Well, the ones that I put the blankets on, I put 2 or 3 inches of compost around each of the plants, and then added the varmint repellent, and covered the 2 with concrete blankets. They're actually foam insulated blankets that I paid approximately $80 for a 12 by 20 blanket. And then, like I said, I put those screens around the 2 small gardens and added oak leaves. And then for the rest of my gardens, I would take 2 or 3 inches of compost over the base of each plant and top that off with 4 to 6 inches of hardwood bark mulch. And that was my recipe for the rest of them. Then I didn't either have the screened in area with the oak leaves or the 2 gardens with the foam blankets. The one thing you got to be careful with for winter protection is a lot of damage can be done in the springtime. If you've got a spring thaw and your roses start to bud out, and then if you kind of uncover them too soon, then you get a hard freeze after that, and with the juices flowing in the plant, and then you get the hard freeze and it breaks the cell walls, and you can have some severe dieback with that kind of action in the springtime. The one tip that someone, I forget who it was, gave me was to wait before the fruit trees bud out before removing your rose protection. This is one of my rose beds with that I had the blankets on when I opened up in March of this year, and I had the only damage I had in one of my two gardens that I had the covers on them. I got some varmints got in there and did some chewing on the stalks, and probably chipmunks, and it so kind of tells me that I didn't do a very good job of putting enough varmint protection in there. You see those white jugs in there. I'm a retired chemical salesman, and those are 2.5 gallon jugs that, and I filled them up about halfway with water and set them upright long ways, and that provides a little extra protection for the canes for the wintertime. The results of my experiment is, of course, I did not use, like I said, I did not use enough varmint repellent, and there was some chewing damage, not a whole lot, but I had to cut back a few canes where there was a chewing damage on some of the roses. The one thing I noticed that the roses that I covered with leaves, they did no better than where I used the combination compost and hardwood bark mulch on them. So I will likely go back to just using the compost and hardwood bark, other than I continue to use the two tarps for, and the one thing that was particularly noticeable was that with the two gardens that I had covered with the tarps, they started, I don't know if it had that much to do with the compost or whatever, because I put compost on other gardens, but they seem to grow faster than the rest of my garden by comparison. And I don't know exactly why, but that's kind of what did happen. They really started to take off, and even though they were cut down to 10 to 12 inches, some of those rose bushes are 6-7 foot high right now. There is a well-known hybridizer in the Colonial District area that his opinion was, why are you cutting your roses down to that far, and you're going to have that much more to make up for to try to have nice long stem roses in the spring? And my answer to him is, which is a better result, cutting it down to that and starting from the 10 to 12 inches, or having that rose have bad dieback and I have to cut it down all the way to the ground level and be starting again from ground level? So to me, it makes better sense to make the cut down to the 10 to 12 inches and put the cover over it, and rather than having to cut the rose down all the way to almost to the ground level. And I'm starting to just the ones I cover are the roses where they're mostly modern roses that need extra protection. I don't cover the gardens that have predominantly shrub roses in them, because they don't need as much protection. The conclusion of the winterization is there's there's kind of no one size fits all. If you have a neighbor that grows roses, you may have to use different techniques because of what type of roses that he or she plants as compared to you, or where they had their roses planted. Were they protected against winds where yours weren't? So it's you got to observe what's happening with your rose bushes from year to year, and make changes as necessary where you see that you have problems and need to address. And again, the factors to consider is what type of roses are you working with, and where they're planted on your property. What is the winter hardiness zone for your area? Obviously, the health of the roses, and almost everyone in the country. I mean, even those of you down in Georgia and South Carolina, you still need to do proper timing of when to fertilize and when to stop fertilizing and when to stop deadheading. Even if you don't have to do anything else, but that alone is part of winterization. And just wanted to again thank you to some of the people that I mentioned earlier that gave me some good information and pictures to use with my presentation. And again, I have a lot of respect for those rose growers up in the cold weather country, and the extra work that has to be done to have a nice rose garden.